on this year's series, and then we needed somebody for April, and he gladly stepped in and filled that spot for us, so we are very excited to have our first program. Go for it.
The lack of crowd may be directly related to the quality of speaker here, so let's throw that out right away. I am Les Winkler. I'm the former sports editor at the Southern Illinois, and I still write the outdoors for the newspaper. This is the first time I've ever done one of these book reviews, and hopefully it won't be my last. Judge that by how many vegetables are thrown later. So, the book I'm reviewing is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I heard about the book originally from because Judy's book group read it, and all the while she was reading it, she just kept going on. You need to read this book. You need to read this book. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. And like any dutiful husband, 3 years later I picked it up, and I read the book, and I realized how much time I'd wasted because once I picked it up, I did not put it down. It was like a 3-day read for me, and that's just getting time in, when you can, and reading straight through. So it was it's one of the better books that I've read in a long, long time. I did a little research on the author. Fredrik Backman is a resident of Stockholm, Sweden. He's just 39 years old, which I was really kind of surprised when I learned that, because some of the things he talks about, he's a very insightful man. But then I also learned he's a newspaper columnist, so that probably accounts for his intelligence and wit. And his first novel was written in 2012. It's called A Man Called Ove. He's also written things my son needs to know about the world, and this sounds like a great book. My grandmother asked me to tell you she's sorry. His books have been #1 bestsellers in Sweden, have been published throughout the world in 25 languages. Something Judy and I talked about today. The translation was just amazing. I mean, it's the English idioms is very Americanized. You would never know that this was translated from a foreign language. There are no clumsy constructions. It's just very well done. This book has also been made into, I think it's Amazon Prime, made it into a 5-part miniseries. And while the miniseries would be wonderful if you hadn't read the book, I would urge you, don't take the shortcut and watch the miniseries, because they changed the plot line considerably, and not for the better in my estimation, and they certainly lacked in character development that he's done through the book, which I thought was one of his strengths. I found his style of writing to be eminently readable. His succinctness, which, as I learned yesterday as a newspaper columnist, is probably where the succinctness comes from, having to fill a very small space to put across some complicated ideas. And although his language isn't as flowery in his descriptions as a Steinbeck, he certainly is able to, he has a knack for painting scenes with detailed imagination that just really in just a few words can really set the tone for you. The story itself is on the surface, it's about a man named Peter Anderson and his family. He has a wife, Kira, a daughter, Maya, and a son, Leo. Anderson grew up in Beartown. He's the best hockey player to ever come out of Beartown. As a matter of fact, he makes it all the way to the National Hockey League. Beartown, the Swedish title is Bornstadt, which I assume translates directly to Beartown. And if you include IKEA with Bornstadt, that's the 2 Swedish words that I do know. So, Anderson's NHL career came to an abrupt end when he suffered a knee injury, which isn't all that unusual in hockey. And he was asked to take over the hockey program in Beartown. And there are some elements of the difficulty of returning home. You can't go home again in this book, but it's not an overriding theme. And he really does a good job of describing the town. It's a blue-collar town that has seen better days, and in that aspect, it reminded me a lot of living here in Harrisburg, a town that has seen better days. Population is declining, and businesses are leaving town. That all sounds familiar. And Also a lot like Harrisburg, where the Bulldogs are kind of the social center of the town. The youth hockey team is certainly that in Beartown. When we were placed into the story, the youth hockey team, the kids 15 to 17, are playing in the national tournament. They're making their way to what looks like a berth in the championship game. And fairly or unfairly, the hopes of the town are kind of riding on the backs of these 15, 17-year-old kids. These are kids who grew up together, have played hockey together for years and years. Most of them are best friends as well as hockey players. And the pressure they're putting on these kids is that the word has it around town that if they go ahead and win the national title, that the Swedish government will build a regional hockey school in Beartown, which means there'll be a great infusion of cash, other businesses will grow, and it's a way that they see of keeping the town alive. And that reminds me of the parallels to Harrisburg. Much like in 2012 when the tornado hit, we were right in the middle of the basketball sectionals, and the town kind of pinned its hopes. You know, they were looking for good things from the Bulldogs basketball team, and as a newspaper reporter at the time, I was interviewing kids like Cable Henshaw and Tyler Smith-Peters, and they admitted that they felt the additional weight of not only winning basketball games, but the town needed something positive at the time, and they felt that the town had kind of climbed on their backs. So that's kind of where we're at. And for the first 100 pages of the book, I thought I was reading about hockey. Backman just does a wonderful job of putting the reader right on the ice. I mean, you feel like you're playing the game. He puts you into the locker room. I don't know how many of you have ever played on teams, but it's very obvious that he understands the psychological dynamics of being part of a team. I played competitive softball well into my 40s, and when I was reading about the kids on the team, I'm like, oh, that's Marvin. I played with Marvin. That's Spitz. You know, I know Spitz. You know, Spitz was that guy, and you know, he just described everybody. You know, there's a superstar who's idolized by everybody around him and the kids in town. There's the quiet guy that nobody really notices if you only see him play once, but if you see him play a bunch of times and you play with him, you know he does all the little things that are important for teams to win. And then there's the new guy they bring in out of nowhere, and he joins the team and has an impact that earns him instant credibility. And it's just a feel-good. For the first 100 pages, it's a feel-good book about these kids playing hockey and you know, really doing proud for their town. But the mood, tone, and storyline changed dramatically as the result of a party following Beartown's semifinal victory. And to take you to that place, I'll read the first chapter in its entirety. Get comfortable here, because this is going to take about 15 seconds. Late one evening toward the end of March, a teenager picked up a double-barreled shotgun, walked into the forest, and put a gun to someone else's forehead and pulled the trigger. This is the story of how we got there. That's it. And I can tell you in one word how they got there, and it's hockey. And it's not necessarily just hockey, but all the elements that got to that point stem from hockey. It's one of the, working as a sports writer for 41 years, you learn that there's so much good that can come from sports, but there's also a dark side. Many elements, many facets of the dark side, and it was all kind of unveiled in this book. After Backman detailed the drunken teenage party, the book starts exploring rape, how people are willing to look the other way if disrupting the hockey team is at stake. Sexism becomes a major theme, as does racism and social stratification, both within the town and within the hockey team. At the party in question, Kevin Erdahl, who is the pampered son of one of the town's richest citizens and the team's superstar, rapes 15-year-old Maya, who is Peter Anderson's daughter. Maya was at the party having a good time. She was admittedly under the influence of alcohol, and as a result of her behavior and the rape, she feels ashamed and alone. ashamed and alone, and she keeps the attack secret for nearly a week. She finally, at the advice of her best friend, finally tells her parents, and they go to the police, and everything just kind of unfolds right before the team leaves for the national championship game. The team is already on the bus, and Peter Anderson had just found out about what the police were going to do, and he was sitting in the parking lot watching as the police walked onto the bus and just said they were looking for Kevin Erdahl, didn't give any inclination as to what was going on, and just pulled the kid off the bus. Nobody really knew exactly what was happening. I think there was some inkling among the team, but nobody knew for sure. But in a town of that size, secrets don't last long. And before the game's even played, people are aware of what's going on. And it basically rips the town into camps, and it's not evenly divided at all. Most of the town sides with Kevin, who claims that the encounter was consensual. That's despite the physical evidence, the bruising, severe bruising that Maya suffered in the attack. And as commonly is the case, most of the town takes the attitude that the girl was to blame. She was drunk, she led him on, blah, 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 you know the story. And many residents actually believe that the smart thing to do would have let Kevin play the game and then deal with the consequences. But fortunately, that's not the way things work. On the other hand, news of the attack caused many citizens of Beartown, including Maya's father, to change their view of the town and of the game of hockey itself. And hockey here is interchangeable with baseball, basketball, or anything. It's not hockey. It's a sport. And this is really a difficult experience for Peter, who was still coming to grips with the recent death of his infant son. If I remember correctly, it's been a couple of months since I read the book, but the young baby died of, they didn't spell it out, but you're led to believe it was sudden infant death syndrome while Peter was watching the young man. So, and the rape has ripple effects throughout the town because hockey was a religion in Beartown. One of the inspirational signs hanging in the locker room at the Beartown rink said, "The game demands only one thing: your all." And like Las Vegas, when you're part of the team is sacred. Backman eloquently described it as this rink has thick walls and high ceilings, so it's pretty clear, like Vegas, what happens at the rink stays at the rink. But eventually, the attack and the after effects caused schisms within the team itself. And here's where the book was kind of an anomaly. For the first 150 pages, you're reading all about Kevin Erdahl, all the work he put in, how if you walk around town in the morning, you hear bang, bang, bang. You finally find out that's him slamming pucks against the net that he does all time of day or night. But you ultimately learn that his best friend, Benji, is really the heart and soul of the team. Benji's a talented player himself, but he's also the team's enforcer. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit here about hockey because I doubt all of you are hockey fans. But in hockey, an enforcer is the guy who protects the best players. If a team decides that they need to stop Kevin, then they're going to resort to illegal tactics and rough him up. Benji's the one that they're going to have to deal with. He's going to find himself alone in the corner, and he may not beat him up, but they will feel enough of his stick and elbows to understand that that's not the way we're going to play this game. It's the age-old way that hockey metes out justice. And Kevin lives in the Heights. We're also getting to the social stratification of the town. Kevin lives in the Heights where the rich people live. Benji comes from the wrong side of the tracks, and although he's probably the nicest kid on the team, he's the most sincere and most caring person, he's also a borderline juvenile delinquent. He steals a snowmobile after the party, and that's kind of written off as, well, the guy got it back, so no harm, no foul, so we'll just let that go. And he frequently shows up at school or hockey practice stoned out of his mind. Midway through the book, we also learn he's gay. That's something that he's managed to keep hidden from his teammates, although he has to constantly endure all the locker room jokes about gays. I think he kept it so well hidden that just reading between the lines, I don't think he and Kevin were best friends, but I'm not even sure Kevin understands that Benji's gay, and I know for a fact that he isn't. He does know that Benji's feelings toward Kevin are more than platonic. Eventually, after all this happens, Benji confronts Kevin about the rape, and Benji always told Kevin that you can't lie to me. I see right through you. And after Kevin told him that the incident was consensual, Kevin let him know that he was incapable of lying to him, and he became distant from that point on. And then there's a kid named Amat. Amat lives on the poor side of town. His mother Fatima is the custodian at the rink, and it's quite clear that they are in the lowest social strata of the town, and coincidentally live in the lowest part of the town, opposite of the heights. Amat plays at the younger level, and he is secretly infatuated with Maya. And while he's largely invisible, both by his social status and the fact that he doesn't play on the big hockey team, he's the fastest skater in town. And the one glaring weakness that the Beartown team had is they lacked speed. And so while they're preparing for the championship run, Peter and the coaching staff decided to move Amat up to the big team, where his speed would stretch the opponent's opposition and just give the opposition another whole element to worry about. And what's more, he was placed on the first line, which had major ripple effects in Beartown. Again, I got to do a little explaining here of hockey. Hockey is an aerobic sport. Players are on the ice for what we call shifts, which means they play from 30 seconds to 2 minutes at a time. That's why you see them getting on and off the ice. They have to stay fresh. They have to keep their legs fresh. The number one line is generally counted on to do the bulk of the scoring, and as a result gets more playing time. Coaches, they call it double shifting. If the game is close and your team is tied or behind, they'll send the first line on the ice maybe every third shift rather than every fourth shift. So those are the kids who get to do most of the play. And with Amat being promoted and put on the first line, that means one of the first line kids got moved down. He's going to see less playing time. And Backman does a really good job of not explaining, but showing just exactly what a hockey mom is. And there's also racial prejudice involved. It's never said what Amat's racial background is, but from the name Amat and Fatima and the fact that they live in the bad part of town leads you to believe that he's Middle Eastern, certainly not lily white like the rest of the Swedish guys. And prior to his promotion, his mother was treated very poorly by the other parents. As a matter of fact, at one of the games when he was promoted, somebody drops a bottle and breaks it, and immediately one of the parents looks to her and yells to her to clean it up. And Peter Anderson's wife intervenes and says, "No, she's one of us now. She doesn't have to do that anymore." So, the social divisions are very clear. And the promotion does big things for Amat too. His social status soars. Suddenly he's part of the in group in town. And in fact, he was invited to the party where Maya was raped, and prior to him being moved up to the team, there's no way anybody would give him the time of day, much less invite him to the party. And while at the party, Amat is kind of keeping an eye on Maya because he's secretly in love with her, and suddenly she disappears. He doesn't know where she's at, so he goes looking for her. And Kevin lives in a massive home, so he's opening all these doors. And eventually he walks in the room and witnesses Kevin forcing himself on Maya, which weighs heavily on his conscience for the next week or so. And it got so crazy in town that Kevin's father eventually found Amat walking down the street one night and paid him hush money to keep him quiet, which in Amat's situation was a huge deal because he didn't have money to buy hockey equipment. His mother had a really bad back. He was concerned about how long she would be able to keep working at her job, and this was a way that she could walk away from her job and live more comfortably. But eventually, Amat just has enough. He can't live with himself, so he goes to the police and speaks out publicly. And then through all of this, the people who ran the hockey program were trying to figure out how to get rid of Peter Anderson because he was obviously sticking up for his daughter. And it looked like they were probably going to get rid of him, but Amat just spoke the truth at the meeting, which created some real difficulties for him. A couple of team members followed him and beat him severely. He ended up in the hospital after the beating, but his courage in standing up for what he believed gave other members of the team cover to come out and support, do the right thing. And also he was rescued by a guy in town who just happened to be driving around and witnessed the beating, and he actually hated what Amat was doing and speaking out against Kevin, but seeing his courage of his convictions actually changed his mind, and eventually that also had a ripple effect throughout the town. Okay, so while all this is going on, the Backman family, not the Backman family, the Anderson family is really struggling to come to grips with what's happened to their daughter. And Backman does a really good job of kind of exploring that dynamic of how husband and wife are coming to grips with this, what it's done to their daughter. Their 12-year-old son is kind of suffering on the outside. And Kira is an attorney. She's working tirelessly within her firm to try to find some way to bring Kevin to justice. But for a 39-year-old writer, I thought he did, one of the most amazing things he did was he put us in Maya's shoes. He explained to us the despair she was going through, how alone she felt, how she was, suicidal thoughts were entering her head, just all the things that were going on. And especially her anger at Kevin and the way she tried to deal with the people in town, viewing her as a promiscuous person who was tearing their town apart, and just saw her as having a burning desire to strike back at Kevin for what he had done. And so it's with this backdrop that the Bears go to the national championship game. Remember, this is a hockey book, or at least we thought it was a hockey book. So Kevin obviously can't play in the championship game. He's with the police. So the team just feels like they are at a loss, that there's nothing they can do, that they have lost this game before it's even started. Well, Benji, being the smartest guy in town, probably understands this. So he goes walking down the hall near the locker room and finds a couple players from the opposing team and just beats the snot out of them in the hallway. And then he retreats to his locker room for safety, but everybody on the team know what they did, and it actually did serve as something of a psychological advantage, because the other team was all like, okay, these guys are maybe better than we thought they were. And when the game finally starts, Benji scored an early goal, and but the other team suddenly turned their ire toward him and started beating him around a little bit too. He took a rough hit near the boards, slid into the boards, and suffered a broken ankle. He laced up his skates tighter and tighter and played the remainder of the game on a broken ankle. Now this sounds like it's setting up a fairy tale ending here, but that's not what happened. The Beartown eventually lost. It was a close game, and the loss does set the expected dominoes to start falling. Beartown does not get the hockey academy. The police decide there isn't enough evidence to prosecute Kevin. When he's cleared, he and a couple other, several other players who were good players, but they're essentially riding his coattails because he's the best player, they decide to take their hockey skills to the neighboring town, which ostensibly strips Beartown of more of its meager resources because now their hockey program isn't as strong as it once been. And it appears through all that the downward spiral will tighten and intensify. But, like all good novels, all is not lost. Several key players, including Benji, decide to stay and form the nucleus of the next year's team. And it's this point that Backman again shows that he has an understanding of sports and what it means to play on a team. We learned that Kevin and his cohorts, who go with him to Head, which is the neighboring town, They simply play hockey for hockey. It doesn't matter where they're playing or when, it's hockey. That's all it means to them. The Beartown sweater means nothing to them. That's one of the things, like the St. Louis Blues are the team I follow. And one of the things is never to let your sweater lay on the floor. You should have so much pride in your team and your teammates that your sweater is not allowed to hit the floor. If it's caused fights in locker rooms. Some guy maybe gets traded from another team after the game, he'll throw a sweater on the floor, and he'll get taken to task and maybe physically beaten for letting the sweater hit the floor. And that's, hockey players don't wear jerseys. Don't say that, they're sweaters. Kevin and his people, and the people that followed him, they wouldn't mind, they wouldn't have cared if they'd have been playing for Carbondale, Harrisburg, Beartown. It didn't make any difference. They were in it simply to play hockey. On the other hand, it becomes quite clear that Benji and Amat play not only for the love of the game, because they obviously love the game, but they play for each other. They play for their teammates. And just in my experience, I played softball for 15 years with a group of 10 or 12 guys that I grew up with. We went to grade school together. We went to high school together. We fished together. We did everything together. And you talk about a tight-knit team. When we won a tournament, it was like a family celebration. I mean, it was just different. By the same token, when I moved down here, I played on some very good teams, and I enjoyed my teammates, but it wasn't the same thing. I basically felt like a mercenary or a free agent. This was fun, but it wasn't the real deal. And that's what Benji and Amat, that's what they were feeling. That's what they were living. Benji had the opportunity to go play somewhere else and play at a higher level, and he just decided that no. And people in town were telling him, you're an idiot. You're going to have all these opportunities to go play at a higher level. Scouts are going to see you. And he basically said, but I'm from Beartown. And to me, that just spoke volumes about the difference in his character and Kevin's. And in the long run, Peter does get to keep his job. And several business leaders in town who had earlier said if they didn't get the hockey academy, it would take away their financial backing. They all decided, they didn't all decide, enough of them decided to stay in Beartown and pour their money into it, that the future of the hockey club was maybe not at the status it was, but it was ensured. So that leaves us with some unfinished business. Remember that teenager in the woods with the shotgun? Excuse me. When the authorities announced that there wasn't enough to prosecute Kevin, Maya vowed to get revenge. There's no other way to say it. She stalked him for several weeks. She watched his movements. He just worked out relentlessly. He worked out. He did the same routine every night. He'd shoot hockey pucks. He'd run through the woods. And she learned his entire routine. She knew where he ran, and she knew exactly where he would be at a very specific time. So she went to the home of her best friend, Anna. There's an interesting relationship as well. Anna and Maya absolutely have nothing in common, but you know how it is when you're kids. A lot of times that's going to be your best friend. Anna's family, she lived with her father. Her parents were divorced. Her father was something of an alcoholic and had a kind of an interesting job. He was very well, but he was something of an exterminator. They lived, Beartown was found in the middle of this huge forest, and if there were dangerous or wounded animals in the forest, Anna's dad was contracted to go out and kill them. So through the course of their friendship, Anna had taught Maya how to shoot guns, and she showed her where her father's gun closet was. She showed her how to access it or whatever. So Maya snuck to Anna's house, grabbed a shotgun, some shells, and headed out to the woods to intercept Kevin. And I have to admit, I was so invested in the characters at this point that every time I was turning the page during that chapter, my fingers were trembling because I didn't know where this was going. I did hope that the story wasn't going to get darker than it already was, because there are elements of this book that are pretty dark. And I'm not even sure, as I was reading it, I'm not sure that Maya knew exactly how she was going to let the game play out. But her plan did work perfectly. She waited in ambush in the woods, and Kevin ran right up to her. She stepped out in the middle of the path, pointed the shotgun at his head, and forced him to kneel in the snow in front of her. And to learn what happens next, you're going to have to read the book, because I'm not going to give away the ending. But I can tell you that reading that scene, I did not breathe. So it was very well done. And and that was just what amazed me, because when I picked up this book, I really thought I was going to be reading about hockey. So that's the extent of my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions or take it in any direction. I didn't practice this at all. How long did I go? Did I babble on too long?
No, perfect.
Yes. You have a question?
I just said you were perfect.
Oh, okay.
30 minutes, yeah.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Well, having read the book because your wife told you to read it, and then you gave it to me to tell me to read.
He didn't wait 3 years. So.
I'm just curious about what you made from a sports writer's perspective, your analysis of the coach of the team.
Yeah,
I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name either. And this is where the movie really, Peter Anderson as the general manager of the whole program was hands off. He basically let the guy who was the coach the team. And if you're looking at X's and O's, if there's X's and O's in hockey, he seemed to have constructed his team very well. Yeah. And the way they attacked the game seemed to be, I thought he utilized his personnel. If you're talking about that, I thought he utilized his personnel very well. Now, in terms of being a coach who is a mentor and someone who the kids would look up to, I'm not sure he reached that level. He sort of, he was all part of that, well, boys will be boys attitude, and what happens in the ring stays in the ring. I'll give you a good example from my hometown. My high school in my hometown was pretty much the same way as a lot of small towns in Illinois. Sports were king. The year after I graduated, two athletes at the school decided it would be fun to take a school bus for a joyride. So they hopped in the bus and they drove around town. They didn't hurt anybody. They just went around a couple blocks and returned the bus to school. Well, the one guy was a superstar basketball player who would lead them to state the next year. The other guy was a nobody baseball player who just wasn't very good. He got banned from sports for the rest of his life at the school, and the star basketball player, amazingly, only had to run laps. And that's kind of the way the coach, I thought, handled this team. He knew some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. And I do get the feeling, though, that after this incident happened, that those attitudes, reading between the lines, I think those attitudes were going to change for the better the following year. And that's something I think there is a lot of interpretation left to the reader. Don't you agree, Roger? Having read the book?
Yes.
But it is, man. I have dealt with that hockey mom who got in my face and screamed at me and told me I was keeping her son out of the major leagues or getting a college scholarship. What he wrote is so true to life. It's fascinating. Yes.
Simply a comment about, he does address quite a bit the role of the parent and the child. Maya's parents especially, but also like Fatima and all these other mother figures. And an interesting one was Ramona, the bar lady.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought
I know her too.
She was very different. But I think the parents, just like the parents, Kevin's parents, letting their kids have the house for a party. What were they thinking? And then they back off and say, oh, Kevin couldn't possibly have done that. I thought, those of us who are parents, we kind of get that, it's just stupid.
for those of you who haven't read the book, Kevin's parents were hands off. I mean, his father demanded that his son be a perfectionist, but they never came to the games. He would always be on business trips. He would come back and ask Kevin to give the stats, and of course he was always critical because Kevin didn't do everything exactly. You know, nobody plays a perfect game, and the Kevin's MO was they'd be gone, he'd have a party, and he'd clean up, he'd make the house spotless to give the illusion that everybody behaved themselves and nothing was going on. So, and the whole town, I mean, you know, to be honest, the whole town they knew these kids were boozing it up, and I mean, we're talking 15-year-olds. I don't know what the culture of Sweden and, you know, what the drinking culture is. It's anything like the hometown I grew up in, that's basically what happened there too, but I mean, they did turn their back, they just, you know, that's fine, as long as nobody gets hurt. Well, if that's it, I would urge all of you to read it. It was one of the favorite things I've read in a long time. Thank you.